I want to welcome you all to this space. I feel like this is such a unique time in history to have something that is so global and shrinking our world. And yet, in many ways, the experience of sheltering is something that is quite common. I think of the other day I was reading parts of the diary of Anne Frank. She was a Jewish Dutch girl who sheltered in place for months because of the Nazi incursion into Holland. I think of a Rwandan woman named Immaculée who sheltered in a bathroom for months during the Rwandan Holocaust. The reality that those of us from relatively insular nations who are not experiencing civil war or wars from the outside, to step into the reality of so many other people who have throughout history experienced the danger of being outside at the wrong time. I think of Nigerian friends for whom Boko Haram, if you're outside at the wrong place at the wrong time, the possibility of you as a child being conscripted or pressed into the sex industry. Like, these are realities, and now the potential to share in solidarity with people throughout history, for those of us who've lived very safe, insular lives, to now have a threat outside our homes, gives us just a little bit of a taste of what that might be like. And I'm not trying to compare those awful realities with ours, but there is a way that, you know, anxiety, no matter how it's experienced, is valid. And, you know, the fear of something outside your control is something that we have in common now. And while consequences may be quite different, I do think there are some of us who feel like we now have access to a point of reference and a way to share in the suffering in some small way with others throughout history and in many different contexts. I wrote a little blog about that recently, if you're interested. And so I wanted this space as a way to express some of that connectedness to one another and some of that solidarity, ability to listen to and learn from one another. So thank you all for joining us. I also want to let you know that, at least for the US context, we've had a number of experiences, spring break experiences, where we had planned to bring students, as we do, into various justice environments where we explore things like incarceration or poverty here in the US. We've had to cancel those experiences, but we are reinventing justice programs that can be online, ways to listen to really amazing people. And so we've got the possibility of calling students into justice programs. I've provided a link. I think it may not show up in the recording, but if you go to up.intervarsity.org, you'll find a US justice program responding to COVID-19 Kingdom People link. And we're trying to create spaces where students, and who knows, maybe students from around the world, can come and listen to justice speakers share in common prayer rhythms and have maybe even a few safe sorts of experiences that they can conduct. So I wanted to make particularly the US staff, but now that I think of it, if there are IFES staff who might want to join in a Justice Week with others, we've got that's being worked out. We're also, let's see, I think I'll talk about a lecture series. Again, this is maybe more accessible to US staff, and I don't know, Lindsay, if the lectures can be made available to our IFES friends. I think right now they sit behind a firewall, but take a look at this link. We gathered, because of the shift in the center of gravity for Christianity, we gathered some amazing IFES theologians to speak about theology from their context. And so we've had the real privilege of hearing from people like Vinoth Ramachandra or Ruth Padilla-Borst on some fascinating looks at theology from their context. Those of us in the West, particularly those of us here in America, have a fairly limited theological diet. And to listen to these wonderful men and women of God from their perspectives expands our understanding of the Christian faith and even the Protestant evangelical Christian faith and its faces in a variety of these places. So this lecture series is one that we've constructed, but like I say, I think at the very bottom there is a link to the lectures that may only be accessible to people who are on staff with InterVarsity. I can talk with Lindsay about whether we can make that more widely available. And then finally, another way for our staff here, and again, now thinking, since I've got mostly IFES friends from outside the US on the call, we're thinking, how do we recreate our global programs where we send students to interact with other students, mainly in the IFES world, to grow their vision for the world and God's heart for it. And Andrea Lama is our national coordinator of global programs. I'm going to let her share a little bit about how she's been reconstruing and reconstructing these global programs.
Hi, friends. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so we met with some of the directors that were planning to send teams and sort of thought, okay, well, we still want to engage with the world outside of, with the world outside and even in the midst of what's going on, and what could that look like online. So we actually have 4 locations where we're going to try to connect teams of students here with teams of students there, IFES movements, and do some regular daily, maybe over a couple of weeks, time together. And that could look like prayer, that could look like maybe cooking a meal, that could look like telling stories, telling testimonies. So trying to craft all that together to create these sort of 2-week getting together, maybe for a couple hours a day type experiences. So it's going to be fun, but if you're interested, hopefully by the end of the week, the global programs website is gp.intervarsity.org, and I can put that in the chat box below. And I'm hoping to have some information for 4 of those opportunities by Friday. So check that out.
And Andrea, do you want to give the dates of 2 of the programs that have been worked out?
Sure. So we have a group that's going to be fellowshipping with Mongolia, and they're planning to do that May 29th to June 7th. And I can also put that in the chat too, so you don't have to try to remember that. And then I'm going to be leading a group connecting with Nepal, and we're looking at June 15th to June 27th.
And so what I love about these programs is that there may be ways in which we can connect even more substantially. Now, sadly, we are fairly limited. Most of us are fairly limited to the English language. And so it may be that we have that kind of limitation, but who knows, with Google Translate and other things, it may even be possible for us to have significant interactions with people who don't share the same language. If we've got good Google Translate happening and we're face to face, but interacting in part through Google Translate. So the possibility for us to sponsor programs where we, for instance, Andrea's program in Nepal was going to be an art-based program where art students co-create a gallery night or an exhibit. Maybe that could still happen. Students at home creating art, daily connecting with one another through the process, and then having a gallery night that's virtual. Something like that could happen. I'm not promising that that's what it's going to look like, but I wonder if more doors will be open than have been closed as a result of COVID-19. We may find the world a little more accessible, a little smaller place. Though I also recognize the huge technological gaps between rich and poor in this world. Yet more and more people in a variety of situations have access to the internet. And it may be that gap can close a bit. But what I think I want to do for the remainder of our time is to pair people up, and Lindsay, who's on this call, is going to just construct rooms, and I think they can be fairly random. Lindsay, you just might want to be sure that two people in the same country. So we have Jill and Sarah and Sophie all in UK, right? And we've got you, Lindsay, and me, and Andrea all in the US. God bless our countrymen, but let's not put us in the same room with our countrymen, because we'll have other opportunities. And I don't know if there are others on the call who also are in the same country with one another. Rachel and Mandy often probably get some time, and Michael maybe put them in rooms with other people. I think that's maybe about it. So as Lindsay puts us in these other rooms, I think what I'd love for you to do with your breakout roommate in Zoom, perhaps, is to share something that is a sign of hope and encouragement that you have. Let's encourage one another with things that we see that are hopeful, that are encouraging. And then something that concerns you, a prayer request. Maybe you know someone who's suffering with the COVID-19 virus, and let's pray for one another. But after we break out into these rooms, you're free to remain in those rooms until the top of the hour. That's 40 minutes from now, when we'll shut those rooms down. But otherwise, you're on your own after this. This is just sort of a space that we can meet up and be connected with one another. Feel free, if you don't fill those 40 minutes, or if you, like it's 11:30 p.m. in Vietnam, and she starts yawning. If she's in your room and she's yawning, tell her to go to bed, and you don't have to stay up till midnight. So as it suits you, feel free to conclude your meeting in your breakout room. Lindsay will try to keep it just pairs, one-on-one. There might be a room, if we have an odd number, with 3, or Lindsay, don't put me in a room. But thank you all. Any other comments? Feel free, before we break out, actually, Lindsay, if there are others who want to share with the whole group anything that they feel like might be pertinent to the larger group. I welcome a little open mic time here.
I would like to share a more general prayer request from Croatia. as there is not just the challenge of the COVID, but also there was an earthquake this weekend in Zagreb, which and the aftermath, the tremblings are still going on. So it's a very fearful and frightening situation for many. And the student group in Croatia is very small, so keep them in your prayers. I mean, I'm myself, I'm working in Osijek. There is no student group as such yet. And I'm in touch with some of my students, and they are international students, in a very difficult situation. So I would appreciate your prayers.
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. Yeah, you can imagine the challenge, medical challenge, if you get a COVID outbreak in a place that's had an earthquake, if hospitals been damaged, if social distancing really isn't an option when you're in camps that are, set up to house people who've lost their housing, that can be quite a challenge. Any other prayer requests? And then I'll give instructions one more time before we break out. I don't know if those of you in the Oxford office have news from, I don't think we've got people from the African continent here that might help fill out our understanding of how our brothers and sisters in other places are experiencing this.
I think from what we've heard, it's worth saying that particularly in Muslim majority West Africa, there have been particular issues in Burkina Faso and Senegal, not necessarily for the movement, but for the wider church, because the first people to be diagnosed with the disease were Christians who'd been to events or pilgrimages or whatever in Europe. So the church are really quite scared about that. There have, I think, been some attacks in Burkina Faso. I'm not sure what the situation is in Senegal, but I know it was a Catholic that brought that back from Italy in a way. So that's something to really pray that God would protect his church. It's been an issue in some places, I think in South Korea as well, because there were a couple of hot spots, not just around the cult, but a couple of other churches as well. I know in Malaysia it hasn't been the case, but that's largely because one of the biggest spreaders in Malaysia was a big Muslim conference. And there was also a Hindu event that spread a lot. So in a way, the church has been protected there. But that's the reality. If you're in a minority, it makes you very visible in something like this.
Yeah, and maybe some of you have heard Asian Americans in our country are being singled out in a similar way for violence, and we can be in prayer for those who've, for whatever reason, been associated with the virus, whether it's Christians in Burkina Faso or other North African nations or Asian Americans in the US. All right, so Lindsay will break us out, and actually Lindsay, Sarah H. is needing to drop off because she's got a kid who's just woken up. But a sign of hope, what signs of hope do you see